Volume 3, Chapter 7 of The Last Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stephanie Dupaul de Martin. The Last Man by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Volume 3, Chapter 7. These events occupied so much time that June had numbered more than half its days before we again commenced our long protracted journey. The day after my return to Versailles, 6 men from among those I had left at Villeneuve-le-Guiard arrived with intelligence that the rest of the troop had already proceeded towards Switzerland. We went forward in the same track. It is strange, after an interval of time, to look back on a period which, though short in itself, appeared, when in actual progress, to be drawn out interminably. By the end of July we entered Dijon. By the end of July those hours, days, and weeks had mingled with the ocean of forgotten time, which in their passage teemed with fatal events and agonizing sorrow. By the end of July little more than a month had gone by, if man's life were measured by the rising and setting of the sun, but alas, in that interval ardent youth had become grey-haired. Furrows deep and unerasable were trenched in the blooming cheek of the young mother. The elastic limbs of early manhood, paralyzed as by the burthen of years, assumed the decrepitude of age. Nights passed, during whose fatal darkness the sun grew old before it rose, and burning days, to cool whose baleful heat the balmy eve, lingering far in eastern climes, came lagging and ineffectual. Days in which the dial, radiant in its noonday station, moved not its shadow the space of a little hour, until a whole life of sorrow had brought the sufferer to an untimely grave. We departed from Versailles 1,500 souls. We set out on the 18th of June. We made a long procession, in which was contained every dear relationship, or tie of love, that existed in human society. Fathers and husbands, with guardian care, gathered their dear relatives around them. Wives and mothers looked for support to the manly form beside them, and then with tender anxiety bent their eyes on the infant troop around. They were sad, but not hopeless. Each thought that someone would be saved, each, with that pertinacious optimism which to the last characterized our human nature, trusted that their beloved family would be the one preserved. We passed through France, and found it empty of inhabitants. Some 1 or 2 natives survived in the larger towns, which they roamed through like ghosts. We received therefore small increase to our numbers, and such decrease through death, that at last it became easier to count the scanty list of survivors. As we never deserted any of the sick until their death permitted us to commit their remains to the shelter of a grave, our journey was long, while every day a frightful gap was made in our troop. They died by tens, by 50s, by hundreds. No mercy was shewn by death. We ceased to expect it, and every day welcomed the sun with the feeling that we might never see it rise again. The nervous terrors and fearful visions which had scared us during the spring continued to visit our coward troop during this sad journey. Every evening brought its fresh creation of spectres. A ghost was depicted by every blighted tree, and appalling shapes were manufactured from each shaggy bush. By degrees these common marvels palled on us, and then other wonders were called into being. Once it was confidently asserted that the sun rose an hour later than its seasonable time. Again it was discovered that he grew paler and paler, that shadows took an uncommon appearance. It was impossible to have imagined, during the usual calm routine of life men had before experienced, the terrible effects produced by these extravagant delusions. In truth, of such little worth are our senses, when unsupported by concurring testimony, that it was with utmost difficulty I kept myself free from the belief in supernatural events, to which the major part of our people readily gave credit. Being one sane amidst the crowd of the mad, I hardly dared assert to my own mind, that the vast luminary had undergone no change, that the shadows of night were unthickened by innumerable shapes of awe and terror, or that the wind, as it sung in the trees, or whistled round an empty building, was not pregnant with sounds of wailing and despair. Sometimes realities took ghostly shapes, and it was impossible for one's blood not to curdle at the perception of an evident mixture of what we knew to be true, with the visionary semblance of all that we feared. Once, at the dusk of the evening, we saw a figure all in white, apparently of more than human stature, flourishing about the road, now throwing up its arms, now leaping to an astonishing height in the air, then turning round several times successively, then raising itself to its full height and gesticulating violently. Our troop, on the alert to discover and believe in the supernatural, made a halt at some distance from this shape, and, as it became darker, there was something appalling even to the incredulous, in the lonely spectre whose gambols, if they hardly accorded with spiritual dignity, were beyond human powers. Now it leapt right up in the air, now sheer over a high edge, and was again the moment after in the road before us. By the time I came up, the fright experienced by the spectators of this ghostly exhibition began to manifest itself in the flight of some, and the close huddling together of the rest. Our goblin now perceived us, he approached, and, as we drew reverentially back, made a low bow. The sight was irresistibly ludicrous even to our hapless band, and his politeness was hailed by a shout of laughter. Then, again springing up, as a last effort, it sunk to the ground and became almost invisible through the dusky night. This circumstance again spread silence and fear through the troop. The more courageous at length advanced, and, rising the dying wretch, discovered the tragic explanation of this wild scene. It was an opera dancer, and had been one of the troop which deserted from Villeneuve-la-Guiard. Falling sick, he had been deserted by his companions. In an access of delirium he had fancied himself on the stage, and, poor fellow, his dying sense eagerly accepted the last human applause that could ever be bestowed on his grace and agility. At another time we were haunted for several days by an apparition, to which our people gave the appellation of the Black Spectre. We never saw it except at evening, when his coal-black steed, his mourning dress, and plume of black feathers, had a majestic and awe-striking appearance. His face, one said, who had seen it for a moment, was ashy pale. He had lingered far behind the rest of his troop, and suddenly, at a turn in the road, saw the Black Spectre coming towards him. He hid himself in fear, and the horse and his rider slowly passed, while the moonbeams fell on the face of the latter, displaying its unearthly hue. Sometimes at dead of night, as we watched the sick, we heard one galloping through the town. It was the Black Spectre come in token of inevitable death. He grew giant tall to vulgar eyes. An icy atmosphere, they said, surrounded him. When he was heard, all animals shuddered, and the dying knew that their last hour was come. It was Death himself, they declared, come visibly to seize on subject earth, and quell at once our decreasing numbers, sole rebels to his law. One day at noon we saw a dark mass on the road before us, and, coming up, beheld the Black Spectre fallen from his horse, lying in the agonies of disease upon the ground. He did not survive many hours, and his last words disclosed the secret of his mysterious conduct. He was a French noble of distinction, who, from the effects of plague, had been left alone in his district. During many months he had wandered from town to town, from province to province, seeking some survivor for a companion, and abhorring the loneliness to which he was condemned. When he discovered our troop, fear of contagion conquered his love of society. He dared not join us, yet he could not resolve to lose sight of us, sole human beings who besides himself existed in wide and fertile France. So he accompanied us in the spectral guise I have described, till pestilence gathered him to a larger congregation, even that of dead mankind. It had been well if such vain terrors could have distracted our thoughts from more tangible evils, but these were too dreadful and too many not to force themselves into every thought, every moment of our lives. We were obliged to halt at different periods for days together, till another and yet another was consigned as a clod to the vast clod which had been once our living mother. Thus we continued travelling during the hottest season, and it was not till the 1st of August that we, the emigrants, reader, there were just 80 of us in number, entered the gates of Dijon. We had expected this moment with eagerness, for now we had accomplished the worst of our drear journey, and Switzerland was near at hand. Yet how could we congratulate ourselves on any event thus imperfectly fulfilled? Were these miserable beings, who, worn and wretched, pass in sorrowful procession, the sole remnants of the race of man, which, like flood, had once spread over and possessed the whole earth? It had come down clear and unimpeded, from its primal mountain source in Ararat, and grew from a puny streamlet to a vast perennial river, generation after generation flowing on ceaselessly. The same but diversified, it grew and swept onwards towards the absorbing ocean, whose dim shores we now reached. It had been the mere plaything of nature when first it crept out of uncreative void into light. But thought brought forth power and knowledge, and,